Hi, and welcome to This Old House. Radiant heating is the ideal way to warm up any space. It's comfortable, quiet, and energy efficient. For the most part, it's a job for a pro, laying out zones of tubing and connecting them to a boiler. But there is a way for you to do part of the work yourself and maybe get your plumber to knock a few bucks off the cost of the job. Now the trick is to use a special foam panel from Schluter Systems called Bekotec. Basically, you lay the panels directly on the floor, press fit the tubing into them, and cover them with a thin layer of specially mixed concrete. It's a lot less work than the traditional way of installing heavy metal mesh and tying tubing to it. The big reason we chose it? To preserve as much headroom as possible in a basement with a low ceiling. See, the panels provide a thermal break, so you don't have to add an extra layer of insulation. In fact, using this system adds less than 1 3/4 of an inch, including concrete, versus about 4 inches for the old school method. With such a thin layer, you want to mix with no aggregate. It's just 5 parts sand to 1 part Portland cement. Less concrete means less weight, and that's important if you're going over a wood floor. It also means the slab will heat up more quickly and that you can use lower water temperatures and save on your heating bill. Overall, it makes for a much more responsive system. Before you start laying panels, grab a long level and check the floor to make sure it doesn't pitch significantly or have high or low spots bigger than 1/4 of an inch. You'll see light peeking underneath. Fill any big dips with leveling compound. And then once the floor is in good shape, sweep it thoroughly and clean the base of the wall so it will accept adhesive. And now's the time to put down plastic if you need a vapor barrier. Alright, the prep is done. Line the base of the wall with Schluter's peel and stick foam so the concrete can expand and contract along the edges. Peel off the backing as you go. You'll trim it down after the concrete goes in. Now be sure to go around the entire project area with the foam, whether it's one room or an entire level. Now for the panels. There are dovetail joints along the edges that lock together to connect them. Each piece has 2 male edges and 2 female edges so they can click together in rows and columns. Take the first panel, find the corner formed by the 2 female edges, and place it in the far corner of the room. You can work off of either one of those exposed male edges and start connecting panels one after another. When you reach the far wall, you'll probably need to trim the last panel to fit. You want it touching the foam but not so tight that it buckles the entire row of panels. Measure the distance between the wall and the edge of the last panel at both ends. You can't assume the wall is straight. Grab a fresh panel, flip it face down, and transfer those marks to its backside. Make sure you're removing the female edge, then use a straight edge to connect the 2 marks, trim the panel, and fit it in place. Now go back and start the second row of panels. From this point, you'll need to connect at least 2 edges of each panel to its neighbors. Continue laying panels until the floor is completely covered. Okay, now for the tubing. If you know how to lay out the loops, you could do the work yourself here, or you could hand the job over to your contractor. Whatever you're comfortable with, but the basic idea is to tighten up the spacing near the windows and doors, cold spots, and make sure each circuit is one big loop of tubing that starts and finishes at the boiler. The pucks, or studs as Schluter calls them, are staggered to clamp the tubing in a straight line, and they make it easy to set the spacing in 6-inch, 9-inch, or 12-inch rows. The key is to make sure the tubing never makes a U-turn or a 90-degree turn around a single puck. That might kink the tubing. Instead, bend the tubing around at least 2 pucks to turn a corner. The tension in the tubing may lift up the panels in places, but don't worry, the concrete will fix that. It's fine to walk on the panels, but try not to crush the pucks, only because it makes it harder to hold the tubing in place. If the tubing does pop out, just pin it down. Leave several extra feet of tubing at the ends to make the connections. Now your contractor will bring the tubing through the wall and hook it to a manifold that divides the water into zones. Once the tubing is all hooked up, it's a good idea to pressure test the system before pouring the concrete. If the tubing does have a leak, you definitely want to fix it before it gets buried. Once the concrete cures for a few days, you can install a finished floor directly over it. And we're going with tile, which is very good at conducting heat, to make the space cozy and warm. Whatever type of flooring you choose, you'll be able to walk around barefoot on it, even in the dead of winter.